Alright, welcome back. Today I'm going to explain to you some advanced Windows Defender protection features that you might have seen in Windows. Some of them are fairly new popping up, like one of them just came up in the Windows 11 22H2 update. I'm going to go through those today so that way you have an idea of what it is that you're looking at and so you know what these do. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So this first one will go through virus and threat protection settings. You can find this through the home page. Now some of this stuff is pretty standard. This might seem like advanced stuff, but pretty much every antivirus is doing this these days, where they have like real-time protection. That should always be a thing on Windows, by the way. It's fine to not have it on Linux because Linux works way different, but on Windows you should always have real-time protection turned on. The other thing is cloud-delivered protection. Pretty much all antivirus is doing this these days. I strongly recommend this one be turned on as well, because what this can do is analyze stuff as it's about to run. Windows can send this off, check it in the cloud, and make sure that it's not malicious. I really recommend that you be running this on your computer. Automatic sample submission. Other people are going to go and say, oh, well, privacy issues. Well, if you're going to use Windows or Apple products, you need to realize there's a lot of privacy issues. And a lot of the people that scream about that probably also use Gmail. So whatever, there's privacy issues if you're going to use stuff. If you're going to have more security, there's a trade-off with privacy and anonymity. It's just the way things work. So the automatic sample submission is pretty nice to have as well because it does add protection. Again, you balance it between protection and privacy, but this is just so that it's automatically checking stuff ahead of time to make sure that it's not malicious. Now, you've probably seen Tamper Protection. Again, every antivirus has this these days. It's better, I'm going to say this, it's better in third-party suites. Windows Defender Tamper Protection is kind of crappy. It has gotten a lot better, but it's not nearly as good as, and Leo did testing on this, by the way, Leo from the PC Security channel, where he was testing Tamper Protection. And on something like Kaspersky, it's really damn good. And on Defender, a lot of malware is able to get past this fairly easily, as long as they write the code to work around it. Basically, what this is supposed to do is it's supposed to keep people from being able to come in here and change settings as long as they're not giving admin permission or anything, but most people use admin accounts anyway, and it's like, okay, well, that kind of circumvents the point of even having tamper protection if you're just going to be running everything through an admin account. So, I mean, maybe it's good to protect, like in a business environment, good to protect users if they're going to use Defender, protect users from changing stuff, but as far as malware goes, their tamper protection has a little ways to go. One thing that's in here is controlled folder access. This has gotten better in recent years, but it still has a long ways to go. If you've used it, you know what I'm about to talk about. If you haven't used it, it's kind of a turd. You could try it out and see if you like it. I don't really care for it. But with controlled folder access, it's supposed to protect you against ransomware. So it's supposed to be like protect things like your pictures folder, your documents folder, so that way any unauthorized changes don't get made. The thing is, and I tried this again just a couple months ago to see, okay, well, how far along has Windows came along with this? I put it on a fresh install, and Windows was giving me pop-ups for Windows processes. Part of the normal Windows process, it was asking me, oh, can this Windows file we blocked this Windows file from being able to make changes to this folder. And it's like, holy shit, this is a Windows process. How have they still not fixed this? Microsoft has a long way to go with this. Again, Leo from the PC Security channel does ransomware testing, and he's tested it, and this feature sucks ass. It has a really long ways to go. There's so many false positives with it. I really don't recommend that you use this. If you really want ransomware protection, you're just gonna have to use a third-party solution for the time being to get something that's actually really good. So something like Bitdefender or Kaspersky. Next thing that we're going to go through is under app and browser control. So from the main page, you can go to like app and browser control. You can just click over here from the Windows Defender main screen. So smart app control, I have this turned off on my computer. It was basically because I turned off all of Windows spyware telemetry. So let me explain a couple of things with smart app control. This was built into the Windows 22H2 update. So it's a fairly new feature. I do think this has a lot of promise, but it still has some way to go. I have tested it quite a bit, and for the most part, it works pretty well. There were a few times that I've had it throw errors for legitimate Windows processes that it shouldn't have had any issues with, but it was bothering me. Oh, well, we blocked it because we thought this was malicious or untrusted, which coming from a Microsoft process, it's like, holy shit. But it is getting better, and I think after another year or two, we should see a lot of improvements to it. The thing is, the way this works is it works off of having a valid signed certificate. So if app developers do not get their application signed by a certificate authority, then by default this will block it because it thinks that it's a malicious or untrusted app. And so the way that app developers have to work around that, like I said, they have to get it signed, and then that works later so that if they were ever to distribute malware, let's say, that the certificate authority can go in and revoke those certificates, and then the app would stop working on Windows. So for the most part, what a lot of people will see on their installs right now is it will be set to evaluation mode, or it may be off if it got in the way, because there's like this Microsoft is testing out this thing where it's testing to see if it can protect your computer without getting in the way too much. And if it gets in the way too much, it just turns off. But I also talk about clamping down on the Windows telemetry and spyware. And if you go into group policy and you start turning off the spyware stuff, it will turn this off because this needs telemetry in order to work, which it doesn't actually need telemetry in order to work. I think Windows is just doing that to screw with people, or Microsoft rather. Next thing, reputation-based protection. One thing people might wonder, when you're seeing this setting is managed by your administrator. That's just something that I've set up on my computer where I've gone into group policy and the registry, and I've changed a bunch of stuff around to harden Windows. These are pretty standard things like smart screen, check apps and files. This would be kind of like how antivirus apps, a lot of them these days are installing like toolbars or things like that onto browsers to check stuff as it's being downloaded. This is kind of like the same thing. It's checking to see if what you're downloading is legit. Again, I'm going to recommend him again because he does a lot of good tests. Leo at the PC Security Channel has tested this stuff out. Don't rely on something like this. Don't block phishing sites because they do a really crappy job. You're going to be much better off using something like DNS protection, like Quad 9 or DNS 0 to block a lot of stuff. And again, you have to make sure you have a good antivirus. There's some antivirus suites out there right now that are pretty crap. I don't recommend dropping money on a lot of them. If you're going to use something top tier like Kaspersky or Bitdefender, it's going to be better than Windows Defender. But Windows Defender is better than a lot of these shitty, random security suites that there's a lot of crap out there these days. Same thing with this is all standard stuff. I wouldn't consider any of this to be advanced features. Don't rely on any of this stuff. Don't rely on phishing protection. Sometimes it works, but a lot of times it doesn't. Don't rely on any of this stuff. Next thing we're going to look at here is isolated browsing. I'm just going to cover this real quick. If you're on Windows Home, you will not have this option. You have to be on Pro, Education, or Enterprise in order to have this option. So I have it installed on my computer, but I really also don't use Edge because there's so many privacy issues with it. It is actually pretty handy to have Application Guard because this works for both Microsoft Office and Microsoft Edge. And what happens is the way this works is like, so in an enterprise environment, for example, is let's say someone goes outside of a trusted site that was added by like a system administrator, for example, is Edge will then open that website inside of an isolated container in Hyper-V. And so it turns a lot of stuff off in order to have extra security. So it turns off things like copy and paste, print files, camera microphone access. It all increases security. If you want to have a lot of extra security with Windows or with your browser, then Application Guard can be a pretty good way to go as long as you're fine with the privacy issues that go along with it. Exploit protection, I would say this is like advanced stuff, but you really don't want to be messing with any of this stuff. Just leave it how it is. It's set up fine the way it is. You don't need to worry about it. The other section that we're going to take a look at is device security. There's a few things to unpack here, so let's start with core isolation. This was a fairly new feature. I think this was added just a few years back by Microsoft. This is actually a really good protection feature. So memory integrity is designed so that anytime a program tries to run a piece of code, it goes through like this process. I'm not going to go through all the technical details and have you guys looking like deer in the headlights, like what the hell did you just say? Basically, it's like Defender checks the code that's about to be ran to see if it's malicious before it actually runs. Now, like anything else, there's ways to work around it, and there are exploits that can work around memory integrity. But this does protect against a lot, and Microsoft themselves have said that this actually protects against a lot of malware as long as the feature's on. It doesn't protect against all of it. One thing that I noticed a lot of people were turning this off, there was probably some good reason for it. So if you are running an AMD Ryzen 2000 series or older, and I think it's the Intel 10000 series or older, and especially for gamers, because they were noticing about like a 10 to 15% FPS drop when they would turn memory integrity on, and so they were turning it off. Now it relies on a special instruction set inside of the newer CPUs. The newer CPUs have it. I use a newer CPU and I've not noticed any performance hit by running this. But if you are running one of the older ones, and I've tested it on older CPUs, it definitely takes a hit. So that is something to keep in mind. You don't have to have it on, but it does actually do quite a bit. The other thing, if you are running an older computer, let's say you're running because I have this, an old office computer that I test stuff out on, and I actually cannot turn memory integrity on because it's using a really old graphics card. I think it's like an AMD 4 or 5000 series, like from years back, not the 5700 XT Navi card, like it's a really old one. And so it relies on a really old graphics card driver, and so memory integrity will not work. So if you turn this on, you reboot your computer, it crashes, reboots, you come in here and it's turned off, it should give you a notification saying that it's not compatible with like whatever driver. So if you have an incompatible, like it tends to be the really old drivers, if it's incompatible, you cannot turn this on. But I've only ever ran into that with some of the super old hardware that I'm running that really wasn't made to be running Windows these days. So I wouldn't worry about this one all that much. For some people, you'll have this option. Some people will not. It's going to depend on the version of Windows that you have. It's going to depend on quite a few factors. So like I've got a Windows Home install right now that doesn't have this feature right now. So kernel mode hardware enforced stack protection is also known as the hypervisor code integrity, or HVCI for short. This is stuff that I have to go in and goof around in group policy in order to get to work. This is actually a really good feature that helps protect against things like malicious drivers. So the issue with a lot of drivers, drivers run inside of ring 0. And so one of the issues and one of the things that this protects against is these malicious garbage BS drivers that have been used to exploit people's machines and install malware. So let me give you an example of that. So a lot of these new games are running anti-cheat, and they run inside of ring 0, which is basically like it's the very core of your operating system. So that's where like all the drivers, the boot stuff, it loads, and then you have like ring 1, ring 2, ring 3, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to get into the weeds on all that stuff. But in this case, there was a file called this mypro2.sys. This was an anti-cheat driver that was used by Genshin Impact. And this is how much of an issue this stuff is. And this is why I can't stand these anti-cheat systems, because you're more or less installing what I consider to be a rootkit on your computer when you allow this shit. And multiplayer games these days just tend to be trash, so I've just been playing mostly single player these days. But this was actually being used to infect people's computer. And the worst part about this, a person didn't even have to have Genshin Impact installed in order to be infected by this garbage. What the malware authors were able to do was integrate this inside of other stuff. So this could be used on your system to exploit. Like you could download something else, like a virus, for example, that could use this to hijack your computer. So this could get put on your system and used to hijack your computer, even though you didn't have this game installed. And because it runs at ring 0s, it allows this anti-cheat driver to do all sorts of shit to your computer. And so, like they talk about in this article, shout out to Trend Micro, because they did a really good write-up of this. There was a lot of details in here outlining the issues that this thing was causing. I think it's been patched by now. But in the case of Windows Defender, it protects against stuff like this, because as soon as stuff like this gets picked up on, Microsoft blocks this garbage, so it's not giving them a bad reputation because, oh, well, we've got these shitty-ass spyware drivers that are being used to exploit our computers and make us look bad. So that's what kernel mode That's what HVC, I'll just call it HVCI. That's what this protects against. So if you turn this on and you're noticing certain games, like multiplayer games, are not running, it's because this is blocking those anti-cheat drivers that run at ring zero from even being able to run in the first place, because a lot of them are allowed way too much power to be able to do stuff to your computer. Again, you've got to be really careful with that shit. Firmware protection is pretty similar to this, except it has extra features. Now it's off on my system. I looked at the technical documentation from Microsoft for this, and this requires something called SMM, System Management Mode, which I'll cover that in just a second. I'll come back to this here to talk about this further in a minute. Credential Guard, this is meant basically for like Windows enterprise users that use like Active Directory. It's supposed to shield your credentials from just being able to be accessed by like any service. It's supposed to run everything like isolated and restrict which services are able to access credentials. So if you've never worked in IT, you're probably not familiar with like Active Directory, so you don't need to worry about this. This isn't something that a home user needs to worry about. And then the vulnerable driver block list, again, similar to this, except that, like it says, it blocks drivers with security vulnerabilities from running on your device. Pretty straightforward. Let's go back to device security, because there's one thing that I want to mention here. So you'll notice down here, you'll see a few different things. You will either see your device does not meet the requirements for standard hardware security, or it will say your device meets the requirements for standard hardware security, which means that you have UEFI on your system. It means you have secure boot, TPM 2.0, and data execution prevention. Now, I want to mention something on UEFI because it's really important. It basically applies to like Windows 10 users. This really doesn't apply to Windows 11. Because someone had this as a comment in the Black Lotus malware video that I made, is they said, well, I can't find any of this stuff that I can't mount this EFI drive to find the stuff that it is that you talked about in this video. Here's the reason why. So when you're going into your BIOS, you have the option to select on UEFI. You have the option to select between the new, basically like the new boot mode now, or you can use something called the legacy option. Legacy option is still around in case you want to use things like a really old Windows, like Windows XP, or if you wanted to use something like a Windows Linux distribution that does not support the newer versions of the BIOS. And so Windows will install their boot drive, will set it up in either the legacy mode or the UEFI mode. UEFI is much more secure because you get extra protections from things like rootkits and bootkits. It works in tandem with things like secure boot. So let's say you're running Windows 10 and you notice this and you're like, well, I have UEFI, I have secure boot turned on. What may happen there is you possibly have legacy mode turned on. And in that case, you would have to reinstall Windows in order to get that new boot method installed on there. If it is that way, you don't really need to worry about it. I wouldn't sweat it. That's what that is. And then enhanced mode, like it says on mine, just means that memory integrity is turned on. So it has all of, like the TPM and all that stuff plus memory integrity. The other option that shows up is secured core PC. So let me explain that. So now I'm going to come back to the system management mode that I mentioned over here with firmware protection. So in order to turn this on, SMM, the feature has to be enabled on Windows and then it has to be installed on your device. Now I'm working on figuring out how to install SMM, and then I'm going to make a video about it. Microsoft has like basically very sparse documentation on this. I can't find anything else out on the internet. People have talked about, oh, well, SMM, but they don't actually cover like, okay, well, how does a home user get that so they can have what's called the secured core PC, which if you're wondering what that is, so I made a video not too long ago talking about immutable distributions. It relates to Linux. Secured core PC is probably the closest that Windows will ever be to an immutable distro for a long time. It's definitely not the same as immutable, but it's about the most secure that Windows can get when it comes to regards of like being able to go in and make changes to stuff that shouldn't be changed. And so if you go and type in secured core PC, you'll be able to go to like Microsoft's website, for example, and say, oh, okay, well, here's a page where you can go buy computers that are set up with secured core turned on. So this SMM module has to be present when Windows is being installed. At least that's according to Microsoft's documentation. I haven't done a big deep dive on it yet, but at some point I'm going to figure out how to install SMM so that way home users will have the ability to turn on Secure Core PC for their computers. I'll make a video with all the documentation on it. At this point, I've just got so much other stuff going on. I haven't got around to that yet. Don't worry about it. You don't need to have SMM. You don't need Secure Core PC to be secure. When Windows is deep loaded and you've ran a tool like Configure Defender, or you lock down Windows Defender another way, or you're using a third-party suite like Kaspersky, your Windows install is super damn secure. So I don't want people worrying about this stuff, because I see this come up in my comment section every now and then as people are like, oh, well, I can't do this. I don't want to have vulnerabilities. Don't worry about it. Like, as long as you're using common sense, you're using ad block and things like that to block like malicious ads, and you're careful about what websites you go to and what you download. This stuff is all like icing on the cake, so to speak. Like, it definitely does help. So, things like I've talked about fileless malware. All of these features would help protect you against things like fileless malware, where, okay, you wouldn't even notice that your machine is infected, but this can help protect you against things like that, like memory integrity, for example, or the kernel mode hardware enforced stack protection. I mean, all of this stuff works in tandem. It's a layered approach in security. But again, nothing's foolproof. Just because you have these advanced features too, doesn't mean that you're invulnerable against getting malware. So, I hope that clears things up. If you have any questions, if I didn't explain something thoroughly enough, or if I skipped over something, maybe I didn't realize and I skipped over something that I should have explained, go ahead and drop a comment down below. Let me know. I will explain to the best of my abilities to answer any questions. And with all that being said, I will see you on Friday.